Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Spectator Sports. We have a little bit of a new look here moving forward with the podcast. But before we get into all the wild card action in the NFL, please like and subscribe to the page. It makes a massive difference in the YouTube algorithm. And take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. Links are in the description. The San Francisco 49ers, man, this team is really scary. And I mean, we thought the moment may be too big for a guy like Brock Purdy, but those player jitters, he shrugged off. And he had a great day with 4 total touchdowns, 3 through the air, 1 on the ground. And despite a very tough first half with the Seattle Seahawks, the second half really proved to be a big difference where the defensive line for the 49ers really clamped down when necessary, including a strip sack of Geno Smith, and they rushed him on another throw that resulted in an interception. I mean, this team is dangerous. With Deebo Samuel back in the fold, I mean, he had a great catch and run to put the game out of reach. This team is looking very scary. Brandon Ayuk had another great game as well. And Kyle Shanahan called an amazing game. I mean, with the running plays that he called and also integrating Elijah Mitchell, that is a great complementary back to a guy like Christian McCaffrey. I'm stunned with how they've looked, and I think they'll cruise to the NFC Championship game. I only think that a team like the Dallas Cowboys, if they advance and meet them in the divisional round, could pose a threat, but I think this team is looking like the top team in the NFC. For the Seahawks, I mean, this was a really impressive game, especially in that first half. I mean, they actually went into halftime up 17-16. Hats off to Geno Smith. Like I said, he's had a phenomenal year, exceeded expectations. And for Seattle, who is supposed to be rebuilding, I mean, they have jump-started that rebuilding year. And I think they're going to be having a really bright future with the bevy of picks that they got in the Russell Wilson trade. All they have to really do is really shore up this defense that was really exploited in this matchup. But good things are definitely happening for Seattle. The Jaguars pulled off an unbelievable comeback. I mean, this team was down 27-0 in the second quarter, and this was mainly because of Trevor Lawrence. In his playoff debut, he had 4 interceptions in the first half alone, and 3 of them went to Asante Samuel Jr. A great defensive plan by Brandon Staley. I mean, he disguised a lot of man looks for zone, and it really confused Trevor Lawrence. But just before halftime, they got some momentum, and this is really what the NFL is about. I mean, momentum is a big thing. Getting that touchdown really proved to be big dividends for the Jaguars. They got some success. They had some good looks, and Doug Peterson took note of that. They decided to change the offensive game plan in the second half. They went up-tempo. Trevor Lawrence made a key audible in the end of the third quarter that resulted in a deep pass to Zay Jones. And in this look, he noticed that they were playing zone, and a big gaffe by the Chargers defense where Chargers safety Derwin James didn't pick up the deep zone there, and Zay Jones got behind the defense for a pivotal play that resulted in a touchdown, cutting the deficit to just 10 points going into that fourth quarter. A key issue for the Chargers was a lack of running game. I mean, Austin Eckler didn't have a lot of touches in the second half, and they resulted in very short possessions as there were a lot of punts or short drives that ended up in field goal attempts. And the second one was a big miss by Cameron Dicker that was just from 40 yards out, and this kept the Jaguars within striking distance. On the ensuing possession, the Jaguars took advantage of that, and again, a really good play call by Doug Peterson resulting in a 2-point conversion, really taking advantage of that penalty that they got, and noticing that Trevor Lawrence is a 6'6" quarterback, and utilizing that full frame, all he really had to do was extend the ball out past the goal line, and now they're down only 2 points, and if they get a stop, all they have to do is get a field goal to take home the victory. Their defense got another Chargers punt, and on 4th down and inches from the 40-yard line of the Chargers, this was a really nice play call that reminded me of their first matchup. And that first matchup back in week 3, they used a misdirection where the blockers ran right but decided to run a toss play to the left, and using that alleyway, James Robinson was able to get loose for a touchdown. On this play, they had the offensive line blocking to the left, and then Travis Etienne running a stretch play over to the right side of the line. This forced a one-on-one matchup with Asante Samuel, and Travis Etienne pretty much sealed the deal, getting them into field field goal range, and they won on a walk-off field goal. Hats off to Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence. I mean, especially Doug. I mean, he's nurtured this Jaguars franchise who came into the season off a 3-14 record, not a lot of expectations, and pulled them to the division title, and now a playoff win, his 5th in his career, including a Super Bowl victory back to his Philadelphia days where he went head-to-head against Bill Belichick and torched that Bill Belichick defense. So he's definitely not afraid of the moment. He's called plays like the Philly special and then that key 2-point conversion. And I'm really impressed with this Jaguars team. They have nothing to lose and only more momentum to build to next season. With this latest Chargers loss, I mean, this has been a snake-bitten franchise dating back to those Kellen Winslow, Dan Fouts days to the Phillip Rivers, LaDainian Tomlinson days. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong for them, whether it's injuries or just weird circumstances that are out of their control. They just can't seem to get out their own way. With a bevy of offseason moves, particularly on defense, I thought the LA Chargers would make that leap and even surpass a team like the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC West. I don't think Brandon Staley survives this collapse. It was looking great in that first half, but giving up a 27-0 lead and going back to last week where he played his starters an excessive amount of time, and then that resulted in Mike Williams getting hurt and being basically knocked out for the entire postseason, really hurts his chances of returning next season. Just there's too many bad decisions at really poor times in this tenure with the Chargers, and I think ownership has to maximize this window while Justin Herbert is on his rookie scale deal. Obviously, he's heading into year 4, and then they'll definitely extend his 5th-year option, so they have 2 more years under this relatively cheap deal that they can surround him with a bevy of talent. They did that, but a lot of these moves didn't work out. Now, for a guy like Brandon Staley that coaches defense, this defense was very underwhelming. We can talk about the injuries across the board, but still, they just didn't get the job done when they needed to. Also, their running game. We know a guy like Austin Eckler, he has a nose for the end zone, but just not a really effective running back between the tackles. He's had too many performances where he's been held to well below 70 yards rushing. I just don't think he's a bell cow running back, and they need to find a way to find some more balance in this offense. And then you add in a few injury-prone receivers. This offense is very limited for Justin Herbert, and that's a shame because he's such a talented quarterback and he can only do so much. Great quarterback, but a not-so-great team. I would do everything in my power to get a guy like Sean Payton, or at least a very good offensive-minded coach, to take over this team. This team has all the talent in the world, but they just can't overcome their own dysfunction if they really want to contend in the AFC. Buffalo survived everything Miami threw at them. I mean, it was a really disappointing performance by the Bills, who raced out to a 17-0 lead, but then turnovers by Josh Allen proved to be a big difference in this game, and that got the Miami Dolphins back into the game with their third-string quarterback in Skylar Thompson, who played quite admirably, I must say. Mike McDaniels called a great game overall. I mean, the only problems were that they just couldn't communicate as properly as they would like to in that second half, which resulted in a lot of delay of game penalties or pre-snap penalties. That's what was really the difference in this game that forced Skylar Thompson to operate in 3rd and long situations. But going back to Josh Allen, there were 3 key turnovers, 2 interceptions. The first one wasn't really his fault. That was more on Cole Beasley, but the turnover, including the fumble that resulted in a scoop and score that resulted in Miami's first lead of the game, really put Buffalo in a little bit of a pickle in that 3rd quarter. But thanks to an interception by Skylar Thompson, this built a 10-point lead going into the 4th quarter for the Bills, and this was enough cushion that the Miami Dolphins couldn't come back from. Like I said, they played really admirably, but it was just too much to overcome given that they were on their 3rd-string quarterback. Overall, this Bills team just makes life way too hard on themselves, so they'll have to make a lot of adjustments in the divisional round. This time, Tyler Huntley was starting, and he's a much more competent quarterback than Anthony Brown. No disrespect to Brown, he is a 3rd-string quarterback. There's a reason for that. But despite the Ravens trailing early 9-0, they rallied back thanks to a key forced fumble in the 2nd quarter by Kyle Hamilton that propelled the Ravens to take a 10-9 lead heading into halftime. They had an opportunity to further extend that lead if they had a better red zone execution, but still, I was really impressed that the Ravens came out fighting compared to their earlier matchup in the previous week. Both teams scored touchdowns in the 3rd quarter, and that meant that we were heading into a tie game in the 4th quarter, with Baltimore driving towards the end zone on a 3rd down and 1 at the Cincinnati 1-yard line. This was the most pivotal play of the game, where Logan Wilson punched the ball out when Tyler Huntley was jumping over the pile rather than trying to burrow down and sneak in for the go-ahead touchdown. The ball lands in the hands of Sam Hubbard, who is a defensive end for the Cincinnati Bengals, a hometown kid. He picks up the ball and runs it all the way back 98 yards for a scoop and score. Go-ahead touchdown. Man needs oxygen. Credit to Hubbard. I mean, he ran 98 yards for the go-ahead score, like I said, and that was pretty much the difference in this game. The Ravens had opportunities, but they couldn't manufacture points despite a last-gasp opportunity by Tyler Huntley lofting it towards the end zone, and off a ricochet, Prochet had a chance to make a play on it, but it just went through his hands. It's really hard to say. It's easier said than done looking at the replays, but still, maybe had to make those plays. Credit to the Ravens for putting up a hell of a fight. I thought this game would be similar to last week with the Bengals coasting to an easy victory to the divisional round, but they made it tough, and that just goes to show that these divisional matchups are bigger than just what's on paper. Any two division rivals can make it tough on one another. Now the Bengals are moving on to the divisional round, playing the Buffalo Bills next week. I told you guys, the Minnesota Vikings are frauds. They ended up losing to the New York Giants 31-24, and they're going home in the first round yet again, upset by the 6th seed. And honestly, they've been the most fraudulent 13-4 team. I told you that they came into this matchup with a -point differential. They got blown out by teams like Dallas, Philadelphia, and they were even down by the Indianapolis Colts by 33 points at halftime. Despite all these bounces going their way, I knew that they were going to have a short time in the playoffs. But jokes aside, credit to the New York Giants. I mean, Daniel Jones had a phenomenal game. Also, Saquon Barkley, and big props to Brian Daboll. I mean, he's changed the entire culture of the New York franchise, who picked up their first victory since Super Bowl 46, and that's 11 years ago. Big time win, big time move for the franchise going forward, and I think this tandem of Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley are going to be here to stay. Daniel Jones has made a lot of strides. He's not turning over the ball at a rate that was very concerning in his first 3-4 years in the NFL. It's really sliced and diced this Minnesota defense that has been very leaky, so it's also not a big flex to talk about that, but really took advantage of the moment. I mean, despite them trailing early 7-0, they reeled off 17 straight points to take a 17-14 lead at the halftime, and it kept on putting pressure on Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings. Honestly, this Giants team has exceeded expectations, and now they're heading over to Philadelphia to play the Eagles next weekend on Saturday night, as playing a division rival brings up your antenna by an extra notch or two. So very excited to see the Giants next week. But to further talk about Minnesota, I mean, they, like I said, have been a very soft team, especially defensively. They have a lot of talent on offense, but they just don't seem to get the job done. Dalvin Cook, I mean, he's like a home run threat, but otherwise he usually strikes out quite often. Just too many performances where he came up small. I mean, his yards per carry average is solid, but I mean, that's really ballooned thanks to these long gains on the ground that he does occasionally have. But also Justin Jefferson, I mean, 7 catches for 47 yards. Come on, this guy is supposedly the best receiver in the league. He's come up small in some of these bigger matchups. We do remember that Monday night showdown against the Philadelphia Eagles where Darius Slay pretty much shut him down. And in the second matchup against the Green Bay Packers, I mean, Jair Alexander and then Packers secondary basically put him in jail. He didn't finish the season on the best of notes, so I was a little bit concerned, but New York's defense, especially their secondary, isn't anything to be afraid of in my opinion, but really came up small. And then big sequences by the Vikings shooting themselves in the foot. They had an opportunity to drive down the field and go ahead, but a big false start penalty pushed them back in a 4th and 1 situation, so they had to settle for a field goal. And on the ensuing possession, Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley led a masterful drive to take the lead. The Vikings had 2 more possessions after they were down 31-24, and still it was too much check down Charlie from Kirk Cousins. I mean, there was too many dump off passes to Dalvin Cook or passes underneath, and without a bogus call by the refs that called a roughing the passer, it was the softest of throwdowns that you'll ever see in the modern NFL. So I really am confused what these NFL refs want the pass rushers to do in those situations. But they were bailed out by that call. And on 4th and 8, with the game on the line, I know there was pressure in Cousins' face. He decided to go underneath again to TJ Hawkinson, and he was stopped 5 yards short. I mean, at least put the ball in Adam Thielen's or target Justin Jefferson. I don't know exactly what the coverage was on that, but that's just not getting the job done. Once again, Kirk Cousins comes up small. He only has one playoff victory, and again, a very underperforming tenure with the Minnesota Vikings. He came into this team having a fully guaranteed contract, but really hasn't done too much with it so far. Just one playoff victory and a ton of disappointment. And also, he hasn't really made the postseason very consistently either. Since getting Justin Jefferson, this has just been their first postseason together. I think now with Adam Thielen also aging as well, they're probably going to look on to another wide receiver too. The defense is in shambles. I mean, they just can't stop a nosebleed. The Vikings are going home, and it's going to be a very disappointing season despite a 13-4 record. The Dallas Cowboys dismantled the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to pick up their first road playoff victory in 30 years. This could be Tom Brady's last appearance as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer as he heads into the offseason as a free agent. Dak silenced critics in this game temporarily with a 5-touchdown performance, including 4 touchdowns through the air and 1 on the ground, including a naked bootleg similar to that Peyton Manning play that we saw about 10 years ago. I was really impressed with Dallas. They smothered the Tampa Bay offense, and offensively they were the total opposite of what they were last week against the Washington Commanders. Dak was in command of the offense. Running game was solid, but mainly with Tony Pollard, and surprisingly, Dak really was doing well running the ball himself, something we haven't seen since that horrific injury that he suffered 2 years ago. But I'm glad to see that he's somewhat regaining that dual threat capability that he had earlier in his career. Really efficient with the ball. I mean, he was on time with his passes, really finding holes in the zone in this Tampa Bay defense. That hasn't been the same compared to years of the past. Tom Brady was off the mark from the start. The Tampa Bay offense just didn't seem to get into a rhythm until late in the game when the score didn't really matter. Tom Brady's first red zone interception was very costly as this wiped out early momentum for Tampa Bay as they were poised to take the lead in the first half. But this turned into a touchdown the other way for Dallas, and they really never looked back. And this game was simply just a microcosm of the Bucs' entire season. I mean, they only had 2 wins against teams above 500, one against Dallas on opening day, so you can take that out of the equation, and the other one coming against the Seattle Seahawks in Germany. The rest of it has been against teams in that very poor NFC South division and a bunch of teams that were in last place or at the bottom of the NFC. This team is just not together, and I think definitely Tom Brady will be looking to take some time away from football, whether it be for himself or take on that TV broadcasting role as a next endeavor in his career. But if he's looking to play more football, there's certainly an opening in Vegas as they need a quarterback to man that team. Like I said, with Dallas, they were very impressive. I mean, offensively, they devised very good schemes, especially in the passing game, aiding Dak Prescott's confidence, getting him on the move on those bootlegs that he likes. And late in the third quarter, with momentum favoring Tampa Bay, there was a key breakdown in the defense that allowed CeeDee Lamb to run as wide open as you'll ever see, and he's Dallas's best receiver by far. So a complete busted coverage that ended all hopes of a comeback attempt. So Dallas is moving on. They're going to be playing the San Francisco 49ers in the divisional round. So now that we've wrapped up all the recaps and storylines of Super Wildcard Weekend, it's time to preview the divisional round, starting off with Jacksonville taking on Kansas City. This is a battle between student and the teacher. The student being Doug Peterson, a former protege of the highly renowned coach Andy Reid of the Kansas City Chiefs. This will only be the third encounter between these two head coaches, as they only coached against each other once before back in Doug Peterson's Philadelphia days, and they matched up earlier this season in Kansas City. Now, that game was very one-sided towards the Kansas City Chiefs as they were streaking towards the number 1 seed, and Jacksonville was still in their mid-season rut. This is a totally different Jacksonville team, and they have been coming into this game winning the last 6 games basically with their backs against the wall, given that they had such a horrid start. Trevor Lawrence has looked phenomenal during this stretch, especially in the last 5 drives where he orchestrated scoring drives to propel the Jaguars to that wild comeback victory against the LA Chargers. Kansas City has benefited from the bye week, so they are coming into this matchup well rested, and they've been quietly one of the more juggernaut teams despite trading away Tyreek Hill in the offseason. Travis Kelce is the undisputed go-to option in this offense as he's picked up another all-pro season for the tight end spot. And also, he's not alone. They have a bevy of pass catchers like Jerick McKinnon out of the backfield. They have MVS, Juju Smith-Schuster, and then Tony that was picked up from the New York Giants earlier this season. They are loaded at this wide receiver position. They can just beat you so many different ways. Offensive line has been very impressive. And they also have an underrated rushing attack with Pacheco out of the backfield and Jerick McKinnon as well. Defensively, they can be had because their cornerbacks are young, but defensively, I mean, it all starts off with Chris Jones, their stalwart defensive tackle. So if he can command things up the middle and force pressure into Trevor Lawrence's face, something that we've seen, and confuse him and just get him off his mark, he's definitely prone to making turnovers. As we saw in that wild card matchup, he had 4 interceptions in that first half. So that's a big thing, and winning the turnover battle will be big for the Kansas City Chiefs. This Jaguars team is definitely young and hungry, and I think they'll put up one hell of a fight against this loaded Chiefs team. But I think the Chiefs just have way too much playoff experience, and that's going to be the difference in this game. The Jaguars will be a thorn in the Chiefs' side for most of this game, but I think the Chiefs will pull away late in that second half, and they'll win this game by a touchdown at least. And I think they'll move on to their 5th consecutive AFC Championship game. 2 bitter NFC East rivals are meeting up in Philadelphia on Saturday night between the Philadelphia Eagles and the New York Giants. The Eagles won the first 2 matchups in the regular season. Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones have been really good lately, especially against the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, there are just so many ways that these two can beat you because Daniel Jones has evolved as a passer. He's had command of this Giants offense thanks to the tutelage of Brian Daboll. Saquon has just been such a healthy asset to this team now that he has his legs underneath him, a pass catching threat out of the backfield, and just such a stud running back between the tackles as well. But the Eagles are coming into this matchup. They have the rest thanks to that bye week, and they're getting some key players back. We saw CJ Gardner-Johnson return to that Week 18 matchup, and he'll be manning the slot corner position. Also, Lane Johnson will be returning as he suffered a torn groin muscle towards the end of the season against the Dallas Cowboys, causing him to miss the last 2 games of the regular season. But he's used this time to just rest, and he'll be returning for this divisional game matchup against the Giants. Also, Jalen Hurts will benefit from this rest as well, as he's still coming back from that sprained shoulder injury that he sustained about a month ago. Philadelphia is definitely the better team. I mean, they just have a lot of talent across the board with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and I think they have some favorable matchups against the Giants secondary that is solid, but not anything extraordinary. And don't forget about Dallas Goedert, who opens up a lot of things across the middle as he's one of the elite tight ends in this league. Also, the pass rush is definitely a lot better than Minnesota's pass rush, and I think they'll pose a lot more problems to Daniel Jones compared to the Minnesota Vikings defense. And I think the Eagles have just enough to get past the Giants, and it'll be a tough game, it'll be a close game, but the Eagles will come out with the victory and move on to the NFC Championship game. The Bengals and Bills are coming off somewhat disappointing performances during the wild card weekend, and to talk about the Buffalo Bills in particular, they were just very sloppy on offense. We talk about these turnovers that have been plaguing Josh Allen. He had an inexplicable overthrow that cost him an interception in that first half. The second one wasn't his fault, but in the third quarter, that fumble was just him not being protective of the ball. So those 3 turnovers still were very costly, and that resulted in points for Miami that kept the game very close. So he can't make those turnovers against the Bengals that have Joe Burrow at quarterback, and he's been one of the hottest quarterbacks recently as they're riding a huge win streak into this matchup. They're going to be coming into this game very hobbled as well, as they lost a key piece on their offensive line. So they they're only starting 2 out of the 5 offensive linemen that they came into on opening day. And I'm really concerned for the amount of protection that Joe Burrow has. Remember last year against the Tennessee Titans that he suffered 10 sacks. He was able to overcome that, but in a matchup against the LA Rams in the Super Bowl, that matchup was just too many hits and not enough time for him to survey the field and get adequate passes off to his talented receivers on the outside. In this process, it's definitely allowed Joe Burrow to speed up his internal clock, and I think he definitely has that capability of getting the ball out quick, and they could also neutralize the Bills' pass rush and utilizing screens and quick outs. That definitely help challenge the leaky secondary that we can see out of these Buffalo Bills. But they definitely improved, and now we also know that Tre'Davious White has been a very healthy piece back into the secondary. We could see Jordan Poyer also get back into the fold, so we'll see what happens. But I think with the amount of turnovers that we're seeing out of the Bills and just their lack of balance offensively, I'm going to favor the Cincinnati Bengals to pull out this victory and meet the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. In a rematch of last year's wildcard matchup, we have the San Francisco 49ers hosting the Dallas Cowboys as they're renewing that classic rivalry of the 80s and 90s in back-to-back postseason matchups. This time it's a little bit of a different matchup. We have a different quarterback in Brock Purdy, and the Dallas Cowboys are definitely a different team, at least offensively, compared to last year's team in that wildcard matchup. Now, the 49ers, we talked about how scary their defense is, but don't forget about their offense. I mean, Kyle Shanahan is one of the best play callers in this league, and he can devise a lot of interesting sets through the running game and the passing attack to carve up this Dallas defense, who can be had at certain times, especially in the secondary. We know that they have a lot of shaky matchups, especially at their cornerback 2 position. Cornerback 1 is going to be manned obviously by Trayvon Diggs, so he'll probably be matching up against Deebo Samuel. But Brandon Ayuk is a dangerous wide receiver number 2, and I'm not sure if Bland or whoever is going to be that second cornerback can match up well against a guy like Brandon Ayuk. And don't forget about George Kittle. I mean, he's one of the best tight ends in this league, so it'll be interesting to see who matches up against him in the passing attack. Also, to talk about the running game, I mean, this offensive line is one of the best in the league, led by Trent Williams, and in a way to slow down this vaunted pass rush of the Dallas Cowboys with Micah Parsons, Dorrance Armstrong, Tank Lawrence, for example, they're going to have to find ways to utilize the screen game and just force Dallas to take a step back and play on the back foot, because if anyone can stop this Dallas defensive line, it'll be the San Francisco 49ers. Dallas also has some favorable matchups. Their wide receivers can definitely take advantage of somewhat of a leaky or susceptible secondary that we saw last week against the Seattle Seahawks, where a guy like DK Metcalf was able to have his way against Tre'Davious Ward. And I see that CeeDee Lamb could definitely have similar games against a guy like Tre'Davious Ward, and even Michael Gallup, who is definitely healthy after that ACL tear last year. The tight ends are also an interesting component. I mean, Ferguson, Dalton Schultz are a very interesting duo, and I think Dak Prescott has been looking really well in that last matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was just the perfect confidence booster to prepare him for this very scary 49ers defense, but he's improved, and as long as he makes smart decisions, Dallas should be fine. The biggest mismatch in this game will be the Dallas offensive line against the San Francisco defensive line. And I think Nick Bosa will find a way to get home to Dak Prescott and force a crucial turnover or alter some throws that will force some turnovers. And this will be the difference in the game. So I see San Francisco moving on to the NFC Championship game. That's all I have for you for this episode of Spectator Sports. A special announcement: we have now expanded to Spotify, so the audio from this video will be taken and the link will be in the description. Also, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Like I said, it makes a massive difference to the YouTube algorithm. And take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. Links are in the description. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care.